Okay, I hope you all can see the slides. Can you see the slides, chapter 1.3?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Okay,
sir.
good. All right, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Inshallah, today we will continue with our subject, operating system, CSC204. And in the two previous classes, we have already completed chapter 1.1 and 1.2. So let me just recap what have we learned so far. So far up to chapter 1.2, we should be able to understand what is an operating system. We should be able to list down a few of the operating systems which are available. So in the test or quiz, if you are supposed to list down types of operating system, you can list down types of operating system. You can list down what is the meaning of an operating system, what does an operating system do, and in chapter 1.2, you have learned about what is the process manager, what is the device manager, what is the network manager, and all the managers which are available to the operating system. And you have also highlighted what is threading in chapter 1.2. So basically in chapter 1.2, we have understood what is the personal computer architecture or the computer architecture, how is it connected to all the managers, which is the network manager, process manager, device manager, and all the managers which are available. All right. So in chapter 1.2, we are going to understand. Okay, we are going to understand the voting concept. Okay, so what is the voting concept? So it is hoped that by the end of this chapter, you will be able to at least understand or have a basic idea of what happens when the personal computer or when your computer is booted up. Booted up means you just on your PC. Okay, so you just on your PC. So what actually happens? What actually takes place behind the scenes? Okay, this booting concept is similar to all operating systems. Okay, it is a similar process to all operating systems. Be it if you're running in a personal computer, desktop, you're using Windows, or be it you're running on your laptop using Windows, you're using iMac, Apple PC, or just if you're even booting your phone, is almost the same as well. Okay, because the phone itself runs on operating system, which is the Android operating system. So the booting concept is almost similar to all computers. Okay, so when you understand or when you want to learn about the booting concept, there are a few certain terms, or the main terms that you need to understand is what we say as the BIOS system. Okay, so the BIOS is something which actually takes place when the booting happens. Okay, so the system BIOS is what starts the computer. And this is very important for you to understand. The system BIOS is what actually starts the process. Okay, so where does this BIOS file sit, or where is it located? So the BIOS file is all located inside the ROM. Okay, ROM, not the RAM. The RAM is always empty. When you start your computer, the RAM is empty. But the BIOS is already filled with certain files. These files are similar to all operating systems. It is nothing to do with the operating system, but it is useful. It is very useful, or it is very much needed for any operating system to load the operating system into the computer or into your phone. Okay, so there are certain sequence that take place in this BIOS process. Okay, so this BIOS file is already embedded inside your PC when you buy your PC. So where is this BIOS located? So this is a picture of a inside your PC. So we have something called the chipset. Okay, the chipset here, and this is your processor. This is an example of your processor. So when when your PC is booted up, that means the power comes in. Okay, so the power supply takes some time until it can reach. It can generate reliable power for the rest of the computer, and having it turn on prematurely could potentially lead to damage. Okay, meaning when you on your PC, okay, when you on your PC, it takes some time for the whole system to get the power. Okay, so they also have highlighted here premature. That means if you on the PC for some time, or you on your PC and the power is not coming, or the power has it comes in on in a surge. That means during a thunderstorm. So that could damage all your hardware inside your computer. So the power supply takes some time for all the hardware in the computer to be loaded. Okay. So therefore, the chipset. Now, where's the chipset? The chipset is somewhere around here. It's normally next to the CPU. Okay, next to the CPU processor. Will generate a reset signal to the processor as if you have led the reset button until it receives good power signal. Okay, so this chipset here will be activated once the CPU receives enough power. Then the chipset will be activated. The chipset is something like what you say. Okay, let's say in your house the power comes from outside. The power comes from the lamppost outside, or the electric cable outside. So once the power comes in the cable, it will go to your distribution box yang kotak hitam kat luar tu. Okay, it goes in there, and that one will generate a chipset. Okay, will generate a signal. This signal is to identify that they have received enough power, and now these powers will be distributed to all the appliances in your house. So same as the chipset inside the personal computer, the chipset will receive the power signal from the processor, and once it receives a good signal, meaning that means the power is good, it is not coming little by little, it's coming on a strict process. So now the chipset is ready, it will signal to all the hardwares, so then now it can move on to the next step. So step number 2, once the release button is released, that means the chipset has been released. Now each hardware inside your computer will begin to start to receive the power. So the processor first starts up. There's nothing in the memory. Okay, so there's nothing in the memory. So now it needs to put in something into the memory. So it will take the files, which is the system BIOS files, which is located inside your ROM, and now put these files inside the RAM. Why does it put it inside the RAM? If you remember, any process that starts inside your computer, the files need to be inside the RAM. Any process. So in the booting concept, the files from the ROM will be transferred into the RAM. Okay, and it will put the files inside this particular location, FFF0 hexadecimal. Okay, it will put these files inside the ROM. So where is this particular location? This particular location sometimes is at the top of the RAM or at the bottom of the RAM size. Okay, this is a location inside the, it is inside the RAM. Why is it in this particular location only? Why is it not in other locations? Because this location is dedicated to BIOS. Meaning to say, this BIOS file will remain inside the same memory location until the PC shuts down. Okay, other locations inside your memory will be changing to different processes, but this particular location will remain having the BIOS file until until you shut down your PC. So step 3 is, okay, so now it has received the files from the BIOS. So now it puts it inside your your RAM, inside this particular location, FFF0H. Okay, now the BIOS will do a power on self-test. So what is a power on self-test? A power on self-test is the BIOS, okay, will now, the BIOS is a process by itself. The BIOS itself will check each hardware that is connected to the personal computer, or the computer itself. So what is this? So it performs something which is called the post bit codes. The post bit codes is it will check each hardware. So what is the first hardware it will check? It will check if the hard disk is okay. Okay. So once it checks the hard disk, kalau okay kita, then the hard disk will reply balik dengan a bit code. Ada bunyi. So the bit code. And then it will check on the speakers. It will check on the even the printer. It will check on the thumb drive. It will check on the monitor. Each of these hardwares are being checked. Tapi it will take it will do it in a very fast manner lah. Not that means it could be like 0.01 second. Very very fast. Okay. It will check one by one. Next, it will move on to step 4. It will look for the video card because it needs to display something on the screen. Okay. So in particular, it looks for a video card built-in BIOS program and run it. So inside the BIOS program, there is a program, or inside the BIOS process, there is a program for video cards or for display. So now the BIOS will load this particular program, which is inside the RAM. Okay, and this particular program comes from the BIOS tadi, yeah? Where is the BIOS? BIOS comes from the ROM. So dalam ROM tu ada BIOS. So this BIOS is now loaded inside the RAM, and dalam RAM tu, or dalam BIOS itu ada sub program which is for the video card. So now they check. Kenapa video card? Because it needs to display something on the screen. It needs to check. Okay, it needs to check if the graphic is okay. Because if there is no graphic, then problem lah. There's nothing you can see on the screen. Okay, so it will display. It will run that, and it will display something on the screen. Okay, and then it will check for your hard disk. Okay, so there's also another program inside the BIOS which checks for your hard disk. So it's located at this location. So inside, kalau we go in tadi, mana tadi? Yes, we start here. So BIOS akan locate dalam ni, akan duduk dalam location ini. So inside this location, there is a sub location which is this one, which checks for your video card. Okay, untuk display. And inside the FFF pula ada satu lagi sub location which is to check your hard disk pula. Okay, so 5. Okay, next step 6, it will display something on the screen. Kalau ada error message, okay, because dia dah start run lah, dia check. Kalau ada error message, dia akan keluarkan. Kalau tak ada error message, dia akan okay, continue on and on and on until you can read this. And then dia akan check for your CD-ROM semualah, and your disk. Ini floppy lah, dia tak ada floppy lah. It will check on your hard disk, it will check on your, what is this, thumb drive, and so on and so forth, until it comes to step number 14. Okay, it will start to load the operating system. So kalau ada problem, then it will come up with certain messages you can see on the screen. Okay, so now, so semua proses ini dah jalan, and everything now appears. Now is to load the operating system. Is to load the operating system. Okay, now dah kena load lah, because now all your hardware is working. Now we have to load the operating system. However, kalau you masih ingat in chapter 1.1 and 1.2, inside the operating system there is the kernel. Sebab the kernel yang runs the operating system. How can you load the operating system without you loading the kernel? So, once the BIOS has loaded everything, it will now try to boot the kernel. Because the kernel kena boot. The kernel is the, orang kata, the whole idea. That means the whole nyawa lah. The whole nyawa. That's the exact word. The whole nyawa of the brain. Because kalau tak ada nyawa, then the brain does not work, and then everything else does not work. So again, the kernel needs to be loaded. Only then the operating system will start to load. So the kernel file is normally stored inside this location. If it's inside we're talking about Windows lah, we located inside this. So now it will boot this. Okay, it will boot this file. Okay, it will boot this file, and then once the habis file ni, it will move to this file, and then this file, and then now it starts to load the operating system. Okay, so in Linux is almost the same, tetapi the files tu berbeza-beza lah. Okay, file tu berbeza-beza. So if we are talking about Windows file, Windows booting file, this is the file. Sometimes when your PC is corrupted, you can just re-download balik file ni and copy back inside your C drive, and it will load as normal as possible. Okay, so some booting files are different because each operating systems have different types of booting file. Let's say you're running on Windows 8, you cannot use the same booting file for Windows 10. It's different. Yalah, you cannot use the same kernel. Kernel itu berbeza. Kernel itu is the brain behind the operating system. So you cannot use this brain for Windows 10. You have to use the same brain for that particular operating system. Okay, so you have to use that particular kernel for that particular operating system. Okay, so basically this is the file for Windows, and it's stored inside C drive. Once it loads this, it will load this all automatically. This is for Windows. If you're looking at Linux, it's almost the same. It will still load, but the file names are different. Okay, the file names are different. As you can see here, INI8. This is, some people pronounce it as the init file. Oh, sorry, the init folder. Okay, or the init drive. In a long form, it means the initialization folder. In Windows, we just say it as the C drive. Okay, simple. Okay, kalau dalam Linux, we say the init. Init means the C drive lah. Sama je macam Windows. Okay, so this process is what we say as the cold boot. Okay, the cold boot. What is a cold boot? Cold boot means you are starting from zero. That means you are starting from zero. That means you are not restarting the operating system. You're just starting the operating system. So in a cold boot, you will reinitialize the kernel. You will start balik kernel tu, because selama ni PC tu off satu malam. So today morning is what we say is a cold boot. If you do a warm boot is faster, because warm boot tu macam restart. You restart the operating system, but you do not restart the kernel. The kernel remains the same. If you want to restart the kernel, then you have to shut down your PC, okay, and then restart balik. Okay, then it's called a cold boot. Kalau setakat you restart saja without shutting down means they stop. That means everything disappears, and then you start balik. That is called a cold boot. A warm boot is hanya when you do a restart. So kalau restart is much more faster. Dia akan skip proses yang tadi tu, yang initial nak boot BIOS dalam memory lah, nak check hardware. No. In a warm boot is much more faster, so it starts from step number 8 saja. And the kernel pun dia it goes through a very fast process. It does not start from step number 1. So remember, the cold boot and the warm boot. A cold boot is where a process where the machine will shut off, and now you want to restart again the machine. Okay, all right. Next, okay, we stop there. Next, we look into what we say as the partitioning of the hard disk. Okay, so partitioning of the hard disk means you divide your hard disk into several different locations. Okay, several different parts. Okay, but all belong to the same hard disk. Okay, it's a process of dividing the hard disk into several partitions, and use any one of these partitions to install the operating system, or use 2 or more partitions to install multiple operating systems. So 2 points here. So when you do a partition, you can use any of these partitions to install operating system. Number 1. Number 2 is you can also install multiple operating system. For example, you can install Windows here. In C, you can install Linux in D, or you can install another operating system in E. However, in your logical partition, you cannot install any operating system. So what is a logical and what is a primary partition? Okay, we will cover that in short. Okay, and we also have something which is called the MBR. Okay, so what is an MBR? So MBR stands for Master Boot Record. Okay, so Master Boot Record contains the bootstrap program which is responsible for the booting into any operating system. So what does that mean? In the event, kalau your PC is running on more than one operating system, so each time you do a cold boot, which operating system awak nak run? Operating system number 1 or operating system number 2 or operating system number 4. So you will have a partition here called the MBR. So MBR will decide, or the user can use MBR to decide which partition to run first, because dia bukan by default. It needs like a what we say an overall view. Okay, partition mana you nak run? Okay, it's like when you use your phone lah. Okay, when you're on your phone, you go into the main screen, and then from the main screen you choose what do you want to do. I want to make phone calls, so I click button phone call. I want to use Instagram, so I click the button Instagram. Okay, it is not like when you on your phone automatically dia terus pergi pada Instagram. Tak, you have to actually do something, or you have to choose your option. Only then things happen. So MBR is something like that. It automatically it is located at the top. Okay, and then it is located at the top of your hard disk, and it shows you. It's like a file explorer. Okay, apa nak buat sekarang? Shall we go into this operating system, or so the user will choose? Okay. MBR also keep track of which partition holds which operating system. It will also hold the size of each partition. Okay. All right. So now we go into the extended or the logical yang tadi saya explain tadi tu. So what is it all about? This partition table is a table available in primary partition in that day, so it can have only 4 entries. Partition tables can have 2 possible entries. Okay, so now you can have 4 partitions. That means daripada your primary hard disk, you bahagikan to several partitions. So you can have up to 4. That means C, D, E, F. You bahagikan. Primary itu bagilah. Okay. So that means size untuk hard disk ini dikira from C, D, E, F. Okay. Size ni dikira daripada C, D, E, F. Okay. Contoh ni kat sini lah. The whole hard disk is 4 gig. Meaning from C to F is 4 gig. So that is the whole hard disk. Tapi you bahagikan partitions, mungkin size dia berbeza. Okay. So in this diagram, okay, so they say you can do 4 partitions. 4 partitions means you can have 4 operating systems, or you can do 3 partitions and 1 extended. So what is extended? Extended is actually a partition being extended from a primary partition. It's a partition by itself, tetapi partition ini extended from one part of the primary partition. Example. So in this diagram, you have 4. Tetapi primary ni 1, and you bahagikan primary ini kepada beberapa logical or extended partition. And each of them have their own size. Boleh ada size dia berapa lah, suka hati lah. Okay. So what is the difference? Primary, extended. Paling senang, primary can have an operating system, extended cannot have an operating system. A primary partition is a partition where it is possible to install an operating system, whereby an extended partition or what we say as a logical partition cannot have a operating system running on it. Okay, so these are some certain terms: partition boot sector, extended boot sector. Okay, because now so you have master boot record. Master boot record ni to keep track how many partitions. Ingat. Okay. Then you have partition boot sector. Partition boot sector ni, what is it? Partition boot sector pula is to control how many partitions. Yang memory tadi to find out how many partitions you have and all those things. Okay. Partition boot sector ni pula is located in the primary partition, the first partition. Okay. Tetapi to keep track berapa banyak partition yang dia ada. Berapa banyak partition yang ada. Sama juga dengan extended. Extended pula untuk keep track how many logical pula. So then adalah soalan-soalan, you have the logical extended. That means ada juga in certain conditions where dah lah logical, dah lah extended, dia bahagi lagi dalam tu, kecilkan lagi. That means you bayangkan your hard disk is about, let's say 8 gig, 1 gig. Terbahagikan to 3 partition. 2, 2, 2. So it becomes 6. So 6 primary partition. So baki ada 2 lagi. Okay, so 2 ni you can make it as your extended or your logical. Okay, so 2 partition. And then you rasa in future, no, you nak bahagikan lagi. So you bahagikan lagi logical ini kepada 2 lagi. That means it become logical extended. Dah lah logical, you extend lagi. You bahagi lagi. So it becomes a logical extended boot sector. Okay. Are you with me? Faham tak? Hello, hello.
Faham, sir.
Do you have any questions to ask me?
No.
No, sir.
Oh, okay, all right. So whenever the PC is turned on, okay, now we are talking about single operating system. That means macam sekarang lah, okay. BIOS takes control and performs a lot of operation. It checks the hardware, ports, and finally loads the MBR program into the what is the MBR program? Memory boot register lah yang tadi tu, dia load balik dalam memory. Okay. MBR takes control, booting process, function MBR when there is only one operating system installed in this. Okay. So now we learn you have only one partition, so the MBR loads inside. Okay, and it starts looking for the active partition, so you run lah. Okay, so you run the active partition, and then dalam active partition itu akan ada your Windows file yang tadi saya explain tu. So these are the files which are important for your single operating system. If you have a multiple OS, so multiple OS sama juga dia akan run, tapi bila sampai yang MBR tu, sampai proses itu, you will choose, the user will choose which operating system dia nak load balik. Okay, so this is an example. Saya ambil example screen ini. Okay, my PC, my previous laptop runs on 2 operating system, Windows 8 and Windows 7. Okay, so this is how the MBR looks like. Okay, kalau dalam graphic form. So whenever I come into this screen, I have to choose which operating system I want to load for today. Okay, but the best part of running an operating system, a multiple operating system from the same company lah, dua-dua Windows. Kalau saya buat any work in Windows 7, saya boleh buka dalam Windows 8. Kalau saya buat apa-apa dalam Windows 8, saya boleh buka dalam Windows 7. Adalah cara nak save dia, tetapi it's just basically almost same because it's Windows to Windows. But if I have 2 operating systems, one running on Linux, one running on Windows, then it will be a problem lah kalau saya nak buka file tu. Let's say I use Microsoft Word in Windows 8, I save it, or let's say I do a notepad lah, paling senang, notepad in Windows 8, I save it, and then I run Linux. Okay, when I open the folder called My Documents, my notepad file will disappear. Memang takkan ada, because Linux cannot read Windows, Windows cannot read Linux. Okay, they cannot read because 2 are different companies. Two things are okay. But now there are certain ways or methods where you can read multiple operating system. But if you're running both are Windows, then it shouldn't be any issue. Okay. Okay, this is simple. Let's see what else I need to cover. Okay. Okay. So, what are the benefits of having operating system selain daripada memeningkan kepala awak? Because kenapa? Why do we need to have multiple operating systems? Okay, kenapa kita kena ada multiple operating system? Why can't we just have one operating system? Okay, well, the benefit of having a multiple operating system is if you are running different types of program. Certain programs runs better on a different operating system as compared to one operating system. For example, if you're running, if you're doing for like graphic display or something like that, and you're running Apple, so that particular program runs better on that particular operating system as compared to Windows or on. Okay, so that's why we load, sometimes they load two different operating systems for what is this? Because it's easy to use that particular program. Okay, drawbacks, disadvantage. Two operating systems are not independent of each other, meaning they're not independent. Okay, they're not independent, meaning they're dependent on each other. Maksudnya dia tak boleh transfer lah. That means 7 cannot go to 8, 8 cannot go to 7, provided they come from the same company, itu tak salah. But again, you need to save the higher lower lah. Contohnya macam ingat tak kalau masa zaman you're using Microsoft Office, kalau you pakai version yang higher tak boleh buka dekat lower, tapi yang version lower boleh buka dekat version higher. Okay, if you still remember the Microsoft Office punya problem kan. So if you're doing, let's say you do your work in a in a Microsoft Office of the higher version, lepas tu you buka balik kat lower version, dia tak boleh. Tapi kalau lower to higher boleh. So these are some drawbacks lah. If you're using multiple operating system, you need to know how to configure your files. Okay, because it's not very flexible. There can only be one real mode DOS. Okay, there are also some certain limitation because Windows ini they run on the back end of Windows is the same, or we can say the kernel of the Windows is the same. Kernel 98, kernel Windows 10, all the same. Okay, so sometimes when you run multiple partition, there can be some drawbacks lah, some problems because you're talking about one brain, but brain ni control dua benda, dua objek yang berbeza. Okay, so sometimes the files can disappear, sometimes the primary partitions cannot be read, and so on. Okay, all right. It's a very, very short chapter for today. Okay, a very short chapter. So I hope that you can get what I'm trying to say. So basically, what we have covered in chapter 1.3. Okay, we have covered the booting process. So you need to understand or you need to memorize the booting process of the operating system. And how is this booting process being, what are the steps taken for you to boot the operating system. Next, you need to understand the terms of primary partition. You need to understand the term of extended or logical partitions. And you need to understand what is MBR, master boot record. And then you need to understand all this. And finally, you need to understand, yang paling senang, I always tell my student, kalau you tak faham sangat chapter ni, always remember what is a cold boot and a warm boot. A cold boot is where you start your PC, macam pagi tadi, you start it because it's first time you're starting it, mungkin over the weekend you tak on your PC, so you start it. So when you start the PC for the first time, it takes some time. Tapi when you do warm boot, because it's already there, so it's much more faster because the kernel is already present. Okay, all right. Very short chapter for today. I know you all are mandi blues lagi, so we go slow je. Okay, do not worry. Overall, this operating system subject is very, very theory based, so I cannot talk too much. Okay, I just want to finish this. I think the next one will be 1.4. Once we finish chapter 1.4, we will do our first quiz on chapter 1. Each time we finish a chapter, we will do a quiz. Okay? So tak payah tanya saya ada quiz ke tak. Okay? Automatically, bila kita habis satu chapter, I will announce automatically there will be quiz. Okay? Alright? So thank you so much. If you have any questions, you can ask me. Imran, ada soalan?
Tak ada, sir.
Saya akan tanya Imran sebab nama kita sama. Siti Hajar, Shakira, Farhana, are you all okay? Selamat ke di sana?
Okay, sir.
Selamat ya?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Dah makan belum semua? Have you all had your breakfast at home?
Not yet.
Not yet. Allah, kesiannya. Okay, never mind. Okay, so have your breakfast. Ini minggu-minggu terakhir sebelum kita berpuasa minggu depan, insyaAllah. Okay, so minggu depan, I think next Tuesday, insyaAllah, we will start fasting. So better eat as much as you can. Nanti teringat-ingat nanti. Okay, alright. So I will stop my class for today.